Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the next session of the C-band Showcase 2020. We're very delighted to have a guest presentation as our next session. We have a presentation titled Automating Data Transfer for Mobility Services, and we are pleased to welcome Chris Ballingle, the founder and CEO of Mobility Open Blockchain Initiative, to present us the work that they are doing specifically in the automotive industry. After Chris's presentation, we will also have a discussion where we will invite Federico Holmberg, who heads up innovation for Deutsche Telekom Global Carrier, to discuss what the implications are to the carrier, to the ICT service provider industry, of what the future requirements of the automotive industry is. Now, before I hand over to Chris, I'd just like to highlight a couple of items. Firstly, you will have an opportunity to ask questions. There is a Q&A functionality in the Zoom, so please put your questions there. We will make sure we will have some time at the end to go through some of the questions at the end of the session. Please also feel free to post as much as possible regarding this event on your social media by using the hashtag C-band Showcase. So with that, I would like to hand over to Chris to take us through the presentation on Moby, and we will follow with the discussion after that. So over to you, Chris, and I will get your presentation up now.
Okay. Topic today is vehicles as autonomous economic new movement, and also some Moby and collaboration with C-band. So let's go ahead and go to the first slide, because I want to start with the takeaways. Number one, the convergence of multiple rapidly maturing technologies is now permitting anything, whether it's a person, a vehicle, or a piece of infrastructure, to have a secure identity, to be intelligent, and most importantly, to transact with other things, increasingly automatically. Second, a collaboration between Moby and C-band is a marriage made in heaven. I think together we can accelerate the transformation of mobility products into services. Number three, our industries are sitting on a gold mine of automated mobility services that we've called the new economy of movement. It's a blockchain-based, privacy-preserving coordination and payment ecosystem for infrastructure and vehicle data monetization. We think it's worth trillions. So next slide, please. So let's go to the next slide. Good. Okay, let me start with the basics. Everybody in the industry has their cute acronym for this disruption that's going on in mobility. I think everybody says and acknowledges that there'll be more change in the next 10 years, the next decade, than in the last century. Starting with connections, already mobile phones and native connections in vehicles provided new capabilities. Those are going to vastly increase with additional mid and low orbit satellites, additional cell phone connections, edge connections between vehicles and between connected devices, infrastructure, and traffic lights and sensors. Together, all of those connections are creating incredibly powerful IoT devices in the vehicle. They're kind of unique because these vehicles are roaming like cell phones, but they have an enormous amount of computing power and an enormous array of sensors and massive amounts of data coming from them. Of course, all of that will increasingly turn mobility into a service. IoT turns products into services, and it will accelerate the switch from private ownership to mobility, and mobility as a service and usage-based consumption. Everybody talks about autonomy, and the kind of autonomy that they're talking about is physical autonomy, with cars wandering around by themselves, level 5, driving without human input. But we think there's actually another type of autonomy that's even more important and likely to arrive before the full level 5 drive anywhere. And that's the ability to autonomously execute transactions. And the reason we say that's going to come earlier is putting a profit function in a car is relatively easy. That technology is here today. It's basically sophomore calculus. Whereas the full level 5 driving is the world's hardest AI and machine learning problem, and probably won't be fully available for many years. And the final one is blockchain. And that's one that is on my list, but isn't on everybody's list of the disruptions. So let me talk a little bit more about that and why that is so important. So let's go to the next slide. Why blockchain? Can we go to the next slide, please? Good. So why blockchain? It boils down to trust. Everybody has seen this slide before from the New Yorker. It's the most reproduced cartoon in the New Yorker's history, and highlights this issue that we all have felt, all recognize, that when you're on the other side of a computer in a decentralized network, knowing who you're dealing with, what their motivations, intentions are, what they're trying to do, is very, very difficult. Identity, provenance, and authenticity is a major problem in a decentralized world. The blockchain and distributed ledgers can help with that in a number of ways, including digital twins, the ability to make micropayments, share data in trusted ways, protect data and privacy, and to build in incentives for good behavior. So all of these things can help bring trust to decentralized networks. And Moby has built a couple of platforms that we're going to talk about in a minute that attempt to build decentralized public key infrastructure into our products. So let's go to the next slide. So the auto industry recognized the potential for distributed ledgers for this technology several years ago and began experimenting with a number of use cases, including supply chain, provenance, autonomous machine learning, peer-to-peer car sharing, and so on. And what the industry found, all these POCs that were done at many auto manufacturers and many tech companies, what they found was that it was fairly easy to put a vehicle on a blockchain, or put an asset on a blockchain, or put some data on a blockchain, but very hard to do anything with it, very hard to get to the point of adoption, of where something could be used, where this technology could be used in a consumer-facing or business-to-business application. And in hindsight, it was rather clear why. Blockchain is fundamentally a collaboration technology, technology for sharing across business networks. And there was no community. The hard problem turned out to be building a minimum viable community and getting to scale. And so that's really why Moby was formed. So let's go ahead to the next slide. So Moby is a nonprofit consortium of many of the world's largest automakers, many large tech companies, universities, agencies, and NGOs and startups, trying to create simple standards and ways of identifying cars, people, businesses, and to pay for mobility services, with the goal of making transportation more efficient, affordable, available, and greener. It was launched in May of 2018, so we've been in existence for a little over about 2.5 years. We launched with 35 members. We're now up to well over 100. Working on these standards and building this minimum viable community. So trying to address this problem of how do you get to scale? How do you build the community? How do you get to that tipping point where all of this technology has a critical mass and can be utilized. Let's go to the next slide. So why standards? Very simple. Before the adoption of any revolutionary technology, you need specifications, even simple ways of doing things. So like driving on the left side or the right side of the road, it really doesn't matter which you choose, but you better choose something or else it's going to be a complete mess. Nothing will communicate with anything else. So next slide. So Moby and its members began working on standards. The very first one was vehicle identity. We currently have 6 standards either released or in process. Vehicle identity of the vehicle is the basis of everything else. If you have an identity for a thing, then you can begin building all sorts of other interesting applications on top. Vehicle identity 2 is an extension of the standard that we released a year ago that covers everything that happens in the life of the vehicle and tries to standardize the way we communicate and record that. Usage-based insurance, a standard for payment or pay-as-you-go for vehicle services, in this case, insurance services that create data for additional underwriting and additional usage-based products in the insurance industry. Electric vehicle and grid integration. That is a standard that's is finished. It's in our community review right now. Connected mobility and data marketplaces. It's being drafted right now, so it's pretty far along. Supply chain, that one is about halfway through. The requirements are being drafted now. And finally, finance, securitization, and smart contracts were a little earlier along. But we expect in the next 6 months or so to be releasing the rest of these standards. So we're moving along very quickly with the building the plumbing for this community. Oh, next slide, please. Okay, so what we're doing is building a technology stack. The standards don't exist in isolation. At the bottom here, you have Moby, which is the nonprofit consortium, building the standards. The next layer up in the stack is what we call the Open Mobility Network, which is a protocol agnostic open layer for sharing services, assets, and data. It has some core services, which you can think of as sort of a public utility for the community that can be shared. It's important that the standards are used here so that everybody knows how to find things in this network and what the data specifications are and what the definitions of things are and how to message. The third layer we call Satopia, which is primarily a business to consumer platform and marketplace for all of those the data and services that businesses could share in the Open Mobility Network in layer 2 to be put into consumer-facing applications. So let's move to the next slide. And this is another view of the technology stack. The left, the standards; the middle, the Open Mobility Network. And the key thing I want to point out here is this core service layer, which supports everything else in the mobility layer. So it's these core services, which are the utility. And then the Satopia platform on the right with all of the business to consumer use cases. Okay, next slide, please. So let me hone in a little bit on the core services and how we view a collaboration with C-band potentially working out. Each of our ecosystems has legacy systems. The DLTs, various distributed ledger protocols, are built on top. On top of that, we see these core services layer that we can share: identity, assurance, governance, discoverability, negotiation, etc. That can be built in ways that are a common utility for both, that can accelerate both of our ecosystems' ability to offer what we really are interested in, which is the applications at the top. So let's move on to the next. So here's an example of, for Moby, what one of the full stack applications looks like. So I've taken as the one to look at and do the deep dive on is usage-based insurance. We have the usage-based insurance standard combined with the vehicle ID standard creates the ability to do a trusted trip. The trusted trip can be put in an app. We have a map-based app. It looks very familiar. but it's really quite revolutionary. It's built on blockchain, so it prevents the scraping of data, can be built to be GDPR and other regulatory compliant. And then on the far left, you have the marketplace for insurance services, a number of insurance companies listed. And for example, a trip like this could be insured as a single trusted trip. So you could write the insurance based on who's driving the car, who they have in the car, the route they're taking, the time of day, and anything else that might affect the risk. So that's the insurance, but you could just as easily do that same charging and usage-based service for road usage based on the weight of the vehicle and the damage that it does to the roads, based on congestion pricing or carbon footprint pricing, or any number of other things. And you could also include incentives to take alternative forms of transportation or to do multimodal transit in ways that pass the payment and identity through a series of gateways in privacy-preserving ways. And so we think this is the future of multimodal transit and charging for mobility services. Let's go one more slide. So it's not just us, our industries looking at this. Various governments around the world are, of course, moving very quickly. In the US, we have a number of states in light blue there doing experiments in road usage charging. We have a number of other states, the darker blue, doing various types of collaborations in blockchain in multimodal mobility or vehicle-to-vehicle coordination or payments. In Europe, we did we joined a seminar for the EU Commission, along with several others, and virtually all of us talked about the major use cases being mobility for this blockchain and DLT technology, and what they call programmable money, the major use case being in mobility and mobility services. Korea on the right there has announced that they're going to use blockchain toll payments for their national highway system, and 1 million South Koreans already have blockchain driver's licenses. So we're moving along quite quickly on the government side too, and that kind of completes the three legs of what we view as the three-legged stool of infrastructure-based mobility services, which is the telecom industry, the mobility industry, and the government infrastructure owners. Let's go one more slide. So with that, thank you very much. We do believe that this technology is as disruptive and important as the PC and the internet. We think that this collaboration we're very excited about the collaboration with CBAN. We think it's a marriage made in heaven. We think that together we're sitting on a gold mine of automatic mobility transactions and payments. We are excited to be part of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. Excellent, interesting presentation, and really quite relevant into the discussion. Quite often what we have been talking about so far has been very much inside within the ICT service provider community. So this is a clear driver from the application layer that is something that will drive the future. Innovation for Deutsche Telekom global carrier. I just found out that I'm breaking up a bit, so what I will ask is, Federico, if you can introduce yourself, please.
Yes, my name is Federico Homburg, heading innovation for Telecom Global Care. I'm involved in different topics on more internal things for now, like improving the internal efficiency, using blockchain technology. We are involved in other projects on the GLF side, for example, on service level agreements for critical IoT applications, which comes close to what we're discussing here. But I guess we're going to discuss this in a couple of minutes.
Absolutely. Thank you, Federico. So to start with the discussion, maybe Chris, could I ask you if you could outline a little bit of the genesis of Moby and the push the need that you found to build this community? What was the story into building a non-profit consortium such as Moby has been built? What was the genesis of all of that?
So I think I talked a little bit about it in the presentation, but it was basically I was working in Silicon Valley at the time at the Toyota Research Institute, which is the place where they're developing the robotics and the AI and the autonomous cars. And it just became very clear to me and to a lot of people in similar positions at the other automakers that here was this wonderful technology that could allow for coordinated autonomy, which was we thought a much more powerful, right? If cars can talk to each other and say, okay, I'm approaching the same intersection as you from around the corner, and you could do that in a trusted way, then you could make transportation much safer, greener, and more efficient. And of course, there were many other applications for road usage and payments and mobility services. So we all had this grand vision of the future, and then we were all doing POCs and finding that these POCs couldn't go anywhere because it was fundamentally a collaboration technology and there was no collaboration. So it became clear there would need to be some sort of framework for it, some sort of legal entity. It sounded like a great thing to do. So I said, please pick me, and left Toyota to help start Moby and get it off the ground. And that was the genesis of it. And it's gotten a lot of traction. As I said, we've been growing. We're about tripled in size in the 2.5 years and continue to add new members and to grow.
Thank you for that. And there's actually, you mentioned about POCs, there's actually a question from the audience, so maybe this is a perfect time to take that sort of straight away to continue on that. The question goes that Moby looks like it's building for the future, for example, for autonomous vehicles, but is there a POC or a use case which is used today? Is there anything that you do actually in the use today?
Yeah, so as I said, I think the fully autonomous vehicles and this autonomous vehicle coordination is probably pretty far in the future. But there is a lot more near-term stuff that is going on. I think the really close one is probably supply chain, just because it's easier to get to the collaboration when you're dealing with a hierarchical supply chain of a single automaker. But I think some of the road usage is a relatively cheap device in a car, or even the cell phone in the car can be used today to create the trusted trip and to create the ability to charge for city driving, vehicle weight, congestion, pollution, and so on, or to enforce a green zone, or to enforce a congestion zone like in the city of London. So these kinds of things are very close.
Thank you for that. And maybe to bring Federico as well, could you outline maybe a little bit that as the connectivity is becoming, and we are seeing this kind of convergence, we're seeing this connectivity become ubiquitous. How are the carriers thinking for this for the future?
To bring a little different perspective, basically, I'd like to point out we're working with quite a number of car manufacturers, and I've recognized also some of the logos on the previous slide that Chris just showed. And they usually issue global RFPs, and what they ask for is connectivity for multiple countries, like 30 plus countries usually. And how carriers go about this, they usually try to do it as easy as possible and use a roaming approach to actually do that. For many countries that works to use roaming. For other countries it doesn't work, simply because they're too far away. Data service is home routed, and the cars meanwhile are, we call it, part of a critical IoT use case, in the sense, not that it's life-threatening or something, but critical in the sense that they require a certain latency and technical parameters to be fulfilled to function properly. And at the same time, the car manufacturers give us detailed service level agreements that we need to fulfill in terms of latency, delay, jitter, and so on. And when we operate when we equip a car that drives around, we are from Germany, the Deutsche Telekom, and we equip cars that might drive around in the US, permanently roaming there, then it's critical and it's difficult actually to reach the latency SLAs. We can only do this together with other operators. So we are depending on other operators to help us here to reach those technical parameters actually. And this is another example that in order to fulfill the requirements of global RFPs, and car manufacturers is only one example issuing global RFPs. There are laptop manufacturers and so on. There are all sorts of OEMs that issue global RFPs, and with the effect you will have one SIM card roaming permanently abroad. So the need actually for carriers to work together is stronger than it was like 5 years ago, and it will become even stronger. Because everything that can be connected in the future will be connected. So, and it will be traveling. And so this is the carrier perspective, and this is the motivation for DT to engage here, for example, in the C-band and in the GLF. Because if we don't work together here, we're losing ground against, for example, the hyperscalers like Google and so on. They have global end-to-end visibility. The carriers are usually, have regional focus areas. So in order to be really global and have an end-to-end view, we need to work together here.
Thank you for that. And Chris, from your perspective, the requirements, how much is in terms of like your thinking, the business case or the requirement for collaboration? How do you see from a kind of OEM standpoint, from a car manufacturer standpoint, the necessity to work with the ICT service provider and the carrier community? Where do you see from a Moby standpoint? How is that going to work? And
Yeah.
I think we lost UC, right?
Yeah, it looks like we did, but as long as we can keep going. So hopefully we're still broadcasting.
sorry,
There we are. Okay, and I did have a question. So let me start with from Moby's perspective and from the automaker perspective. This technology requires collaboration. It's fundamentally something that we can't do in our own silos. It creates enormously powerful opportunities to take advantage of broader data economies. It creates a opportunity to respond to the huge data companies of the last 20 years who've created siloed data monopolies. It's a competitive response to that, to be able to share data across business networks. So that is number one. Number two, we view the telecom industry as a natural partner for that, particularly maybe with the infrastructure owners and operators. And so we think that our industry can't do it alone, or at least can't realize the really interesting commercial opportunities alone. That together, as I said, I think this is a marriage made in heaven. I think that's an opinion that's shared by the Moby community, if not fully the auto industry, throughout the auto industry yet, because it's a big industry and people have different views. And the final thing is that we have the convergence of our industries as well. So it's a very natural collaboration.
Thank you for that. I'm still here, but not on video. So just to say, talking about the latency, availability, and all the other criticality of connections. So we'll carry on this way. So Federico, also the question: how do you, from a carrier perspective, how do you ensure that the work and the collaboration across the industry is also taking how is it that you see the best that we can engage also the automotive industry in these discussions? Obviously, one of the main use cases for a very critical complex IoT device. How should we best bring that into when we are talking about the technological development, the standard discussion, the commercial discussions of C-band? How do we ensure that perspective is best represented as well?
If you ask me, the best way to do it is to engage in initiatives like this one, and to do the POCs, to show it works, and to have an entity in the end that can govern the whole thing, because it was pointed out by Chris that the actual blockchain part is relatively easy to do. It's, it works. We've done the POCs. We know it's working. The difficult part is standardization. The difficult part is, the putting things together into working with carriers and so on, and the governance piece. With the C-band, we have an entity that can put these difficult pieces together to create a solution, I'm saying, that can be implemented and that works across different geographies and carrier boundaries. Actually, this is important, and we can help the automotive industry by working here together and by actually showing that we can reach the latencies that they require, and that we show that we actually can build a service and that we can monetize on the vehicles and using the identity of a vehicle or of things, basically a bit broader spoken. Because in the end, if you can't build it, kill it, as they say. So this is why it's important that we have initiatives like this one, where we engage as carriers and actually make use cases even beyond the actual automotive industry on mobility services, industrial use cases that are not nomadic use cases, but they are use cases that might work with foreign SIM cards permanently roaming abroad. So you have the same issue of having to connect the different dots and pieces together. And this is, for me, the best way how to bring the whole topic forward in the end.
Absolutely. And do you see, so a question to both, and maybe start with Federico and then Chris as well. Do you see that the whole, is the future, does it mean that the relationship between a customer, i.e. for instance, an OEM, a car manufacturer, and a service provider, i.e. a connectivity provider such as Deutsche Telekom, is that relationship going to change? Is there going to be much more an evolution in the sense that when we see this convergence between that telecommunications services providers are actually also becoming billing services providers, for instance, or are the some of the cars with their connected vehicles also going to be part of the whole connectivity infrastructure? Is that relationship going to change?
I think it's changing already, because as said earlier on, what can be connected will be connected, and connectivity for many OEMs and also automotive in the automotive industry is becoming a critical business enabler, because without connectivity, the device is not always on. Certain updates cannot be performed, data cannot be uploaded somewhere. Or if you think of edge infrastructure, critical messages cannot be sent in real time to other participants of a network, and so on. So it's a critical business enabler. And as such, I think that the carriers and mobile network operators will become will get much closer into the value chain of the OEMs and be part of the value chain, like any other basically supplier of critical parts of a device.
So, Chris, will telecommunications providers become as critical as engine manufacturers, as Bosch or Continental or whatever, as a part of actually making a car happen?
Absolutely, this relationship will change, and the suppliers of the physical parts of the auto of course, will be increasingly cyber physical suppliers. They will, the engines themselves will have data components, and it will become more about the monetizing the data flow out of your component rather than just selling your component. But the bigger picture is that the value chain is of course changing. It's becoming much more about data and monetizing data. We see in our industry, Tesla has become the most valuable by market cap automaker, and it's not because they're a great manufacturer. It's not even because they're a leader in battery and electric technology. It's because they're viewed as a data company. They're viewed fundamentally as an information technology company and as an information service-based company, not as a manufacturer. And increasingly, all autos and their suppliers will be viewed this way and will be forced to compete in this space. So the point is, the relationship between the telecoms and the automakers has to change. It's desirable that it changes because there is, as I said, we're sitting on a gold mine. This value chain can be much bigger than the current value chain because there are trillions of dollars of information-based services and mobility that can be monetized by our industries together. And the final point is, if we don't do it, somebody else will, and we'll be left as commodity suppliers to those others.
Who do you think might be doing it? What did you have in mind?
If we don't,
yeah.
Well, there are a couple of other possibilities. It will either be the existing big information quasi-monopolies, those whose business model is to scrape and silo data and use that data as a competitive advantage. We see that already, that for the last 20 years, those companies, and not only in our industry, but in a number of industries, have put themselves astride the value chain of the industry and acted as effectively as an economic rent seeker, taking a good part of the value out of the legacy value chain. So that is one possible future. Another possible future is that this becomes a government offered public utility and can be potentially the danger there is it's a monopoly by an authoritarian state and used for other purposes. But neither one of those is potentially friendly to our industries and to our communities.
And that leads to the next question. Where do you see, or the next topic is around clearly regulators, governments are a big stakeholder here. Where do you see, how is their influence? How is their driver? Is this you alluded to that, maybe you can unpack this a little bit more. Other governments will be then driving this necessary change if the industry themselves don't do it.
I think that in some ways governments are the biggest potential beneficiaries, and I would say particularly the EU is an interesting place. Number one, the benefits of connected mobility in terms of safety, efficient transportation, multimodal trips, being able to provide better transportation for citizens, being able to monetize this huge unmonetized asset, which is our public road infrastructure. All of that accrues to government entities, and has the potential to revolutionize not only transportation, but public infrastructure finance and public finance generally. So governments are a huge beneficiary of it, and I hope that they see that and join in. We see it happening already. They have the opportunity to lead and create the conditions for our industries to be successful. In other parts of the world, the other possibility is if governments don't step in, then they're inviting more of the type of quasi-monopoly behavior and information silos, which has its own undesirable effects on the economy and on efficiency.
Absolutely. And governments clearly, as we move away from taxing such a revenue, as you said, so revenues on, and it's the future models, because you can't have petrol tax anymore in the future when we have all electric. It's a way, so you start to have various different types of models, charging per mile, charging whatever they use it and all that. But probably every single government in the world has a slightly different, they want to do their own way, and not invented here syndrome and all that. How does the car manufacturers, how do the communication providers actually manage then this complexity that it might be, what if we're imposed locally different regulations across all of the activities?
Yeah, I think that's why CBAN and Moby are so important, is by developing the standards. Just simple things like, how do you identify a vehicle? How do you know that the vehicles that is who it says it is in a machine to machine and a machine to infrastructure economy? If we do this and we have a solution that we can put on the table that creates these massive benefits for the public sector, they will of course adopt it. If we wait and the public sectors come in, then what we'll have is a patchwork like we have today in your industry and our industry. Cars driving on opposite sides of the road, different regulatory regimes, towers of Babel that don't communicate, and that's a natural shift in competitive advantage away from our industries and towards those that whose business model is data silos.
In addition to that, if I may add to this, I prefer us, the carriers, defining how to work together rather than governments defining something and imposing that on us. So this is why it's important that we do the first step and show that we have agreed on standards, on a governance that actually works, so that the government can just take it and probably help us with a respective legal framework that even supports what we're trying to do here.
We've been talking a lot through the past couple of days, the difficulty in a round of, and the necessity for the industry to come together. And this is just within the communications industry. How are we able to, what would be your recommendations? How are we actually able then to sort of start to coordinate outside of different industries as well, with a very different types of because clearly the infrastructure, we need standards, there needs to be coming together of of two very separate industries in this case, for instance. What would you recommend? How do you think that we are able to succeed in actually bringing everything together? If it's difficult only within one industry, let alone multiple industries, what would you say?
Maybe I can take a crack at it first. So I think it gets back to this notion of increasing returns to scale and platform economics. What we're looking at is getting to scale is the hard problem. But once you get to that critical point, you're over the hill and you begin to roll downhill at an accelerating pace. In the early days of the technology, it's painful to get in because you're building infrastructure for everybody and everybody is tempted to be a free rider. Once you pass the top of the hill and begin rolling down, once you're past the tipping point, then it becomes painful to be out. And I think the critical thing here is that our industries together, CBAN and Moby, are together 10, 15, maybe even more % of global GDP. If we aren't big enough to get past that tipping point and address this hard problem of scale, nobody is. So I think we have the power to do it. We have the power to get to that tipping point relatively quickly. The way to do it is to build a shared infrastructure. We call it the shared core services of the OMN. Once we do that, I think it will be it will accelerate very quickly, and others will want in, and it will be very, very painful to compete if you're out.
And Federico, your perspective?
Well, I couldn't agree more to what Chris has said. In addition to that, I think it's important also for the C-band to roll out now the use cases that have been prepared, so data on demand and voice primarily, to get the ball going, to create the network effect, to start carriers engaging, so that they see, hey, something is happening here, and you're reaching the summit, and the ball starts rolling downhill, actually, to get that acceleration that Chris has just talked about.
Absolutely, and I think that the announcement yesterday and earlier today of the memorandum of understanding on the working together between C-band and Moby is excellent. I can say from a C-band perspective, I'm sure Federico from all of our members' perspective, we're very excited of the prospect that has enabling us to bring both industries forward with a much more vigor in the coming years than before that. So with that, I think we are unfortunately out of time for our session. So I would like to thank Chris and all of your colleagues in Moby. Thank you very much for taking the time this morning to come and present to us. Thank you also to Federico for your perspectives on the discussion. And just like to highlight that a next session will start on the hour at 4 p.m. GMT, where we will hear from CSG and from Clear regarding their showcases on actually bringing the technology into a reality. So with that, thank you once again to Chris. Thank you for Federico, and I will hope to see you all soon.
Thank you for having us. Take care. Stay healthy. Bye-bye.
Thank you.